When the new Congress convenes in January, the House Judiciary Committee will be chaired by Democrat Jerry Nadler. He says he wants to open an investigation into Brett Kavanaugh and what happened and what didn't happen at his confirmation hearings. What do you think they should focus on?
You correctly say that Nadler's interested in this. I think the word wants to do it is perhaps the inappropriate term, at least as you look at how Nadler talks about it. He feels he has a duty to do it. And that's very important because there will be pushbacks. There will be some Democrats who, in the sort of classic model, want to put everything behind and supposedly look forward. But what Nadler has said is that the Senate failed to do its job. It didn't exercise the baseline responsibilities in a system of separated powers where you have checks and balances. You cannot give advice and consent without adequate information. And you cannot give advice and consent unless you have explored the most serious issues that have arisen. And so what Nadler and others are talking about is looking at a variety of issues that the Senate simply did not examine. Some of those will very possibly relate to the testimony of Dr. Ford as regards Brett Kavanaugh. That is a possibility because there was so much there that was unexamined. But there's also something else which could become central to this, and frankly, if they do go forward, should be central to it. And that is the documented evidence, that's really overwhelming at this point, that Brett Kavanaugh repeatedly lied to the Senate Judiciary Committee, starting back during the George W. Bush presidency. It's almost, you're really talking about 15 years of lying under oath and of participating in schemes to undermine the authority and the functionality of the Senate as a body that examines nominations for judicial posts and ultimately confirms or rejects them. It is something that the Senate Judiciary Committee should have examined and, in fact, should still be examining, but Chuck Grassley has refused to do so. And so Jerry Nadler, I think, is really essentially saying he is willing to follow his oath as a member of Congress and as the chair of a key committee should he become the chair of Judiciary after the election.
You talked about the Democrats who say this is a bad idea. Their main argument is that impeachment, if the House Judiciary Committee were to pass articles of impeachment against Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, would then go to the Senate for a trial, and the standard there is the same as impeaching the president, a 2/3 vote to convict. The Democrats will not control 2/3 of the Senate, so they will not win a vote to impeach Brett Kavanaugh. And therefore, some argue, there's no point. What's the point of doing something you're going to lose? Do you think there's a point of bringing articles of impeachment against Brett Kavanaugh if they're going to lose a trial vote in the Senate?
Ask Richard Nixon if articles of impeachment in the House matter.
Great answer.
Impeachment should not be a political calculation. Impeachment should be an act of duty under the Constitution of the United States. If you feel that someone has, in their official capacity, whether that be in their current capacity or previous, taken actions that are at odds with the Constitution, at odds with the good of the Republic, you act, you investigate. And if that investigation leads to at least some sense of confirmation of the high crimes or misdemeanors, that very broad definition given by the founders, then you impeach. You vote for articles of impeachment. They come out of the Judiciary Committee generally and then are taken up by the whole of the House of Representatives. And, if you sit there and you say, oh, well, we can't do this because Chuck Grassley won't like it or Lindsey Graham will throw a fit. That isn't really the way the founders intended for it to work. If the articles are sufficiently damning and are sufficiently well documented, the trial in the Senate will become, would become a big deal. And you, at that point, might see some folks step up and do the right thing. It's not guaranteed, of course. I know the hyper partisanship of the moment, but I will remind you that lying under oath to the Senate, to the Judiciary Committee, is something that federal judges have been impeached for. The final analysis of this, I have long believed that the power of impeachment, which I wrote a book about, is much greater than simply the process. It is not simply this, House does this, Senate does that, and then you have these different votes. It's also just the literal act of faith in the Constitution, this sense that, it says we're supposed to act, we will act. If the other chamber fails to act, that is their failure. History will look on them in a very bad way. But you don't not do it because of a political calculus. And I'm really not a big fan of the hyper caution of Democrats as regards accountability issues. The fact of the matter is that there are times when it is a duty and a necessity to hold someone to account. And if it is true, as Russ Feingold, the former member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, says, that Brett Kavanaugh has never appeared before the committee without lying. If it is true, as Patrick Leahy, the senior member of the United States Senate, the senior member of the Judiciary Committee, says, that there is clear and undebatable evidence that Brett Kavanaugh intentionally set out to mislead the committee. If what a group of former top aides on the committee say, that it is clear that Brett Kavanaugh dealt in stolen materials in order to undermine and manipulate the confirmation process for judges when he was working for George W. Bush and with Karl Rove, then those are impeachable offenses, and you shouldn't run away from it. You should focus on it, because it might just possibly be a way to tell the American people that you take the system of checks and balances a little more seriously than does Mitch McConnell.